Brand new testimony tonight from an impeachment witness that has just come out alleging evidence of bribery. A Pentagon official telling Congress about Trump appointees pushing for Ukraine to commit to prosecuting election interference and tying that back to the now infamously frozen U.S. aid money, and the aide confirming, yes, that's what the plot was. The testimony is going public right now as Trump's top aide Mick Mulvaney is asking a judge today to determine if he can testify against Trump in the impeachment probe. If it sounds odd that Trump's top aide is now trying to sue Trump, it is odd. And I have a special breakdown on all of that coming up that we've been working on all day. But we begin with the countdown to the hearings. The White House on edge as public impeachment hearings are now 48 hours away, with signs that more witnesses are talking to these investigators, including Rudy Giuliani's now indicted associate, Lev Parnas. The New York Times reporting that he went back to Ukraine in the spring to deliver an ultimatum to the incoming president, saying that they needed to have that announcement of an investigation into the Bidens, or guess what? The U.S. would freeze the aid. And not only that, but Mike Pence would also boycott the Ukrainian president's swearing in if they didn't get what they wanted. Now, this account, which apparently is now available to the impeachment probe, would add to the other evidence of Donald Trump's demand for this bribe from Ukraine. Now, note that while Parnas is tying this back to Trump, Giuliani, of course, who represented this individual, who was his consultant effectively, is denying the whole news story. But then there's this, the Daily Beast, with its own report that about a month before Trump's now infamous call with the Ukrainian president, two top Ukrainian aides were very concerned about all of this, and they asked Washington whether the money was in danger. All of it comes as Donald Trump is bracing for what has become mounting bribery evidence to go public fully this Wednesday. And if you feel like there's a lot flying at us, and there is in this story, consider that Wednesday is the first live televised impeachment hearings for the whole country to tune in and understand what these claims are. Now, Trump's allies trying to defend Trump in several different ways. The new one that we're seeing is now conceding that something here was actually improper, but saying it wasn't actually impeachable.
I believe that it is inappropriate for a president to ask a foreign leader to investigate a political rival. I believe it was inappropriate. I do not believe it was impeachable.
Let's get right to it with our power panel on set. Mara Gay from the New York Times editorial board, Barrett Berger, a former federal prosecutor, including in the pivotal Southern District of New York, and Wall Street Journal reporter Shelby Holiday. Thanks for being here, everyone.
Yeah, thanks for having us. Girls' night.
Let's start with that new line of defense from at least some House Republicans who obviously voted against going forward on even having an impeachment probe. That's on the record saying, hey, I'm against all of this, and now conceding, but some of this is bad.
Right, it's pretty extraordinary to have, on one hand, taken the stance that we shouldn't even be looking into this even a little bit, and then to say, but I agree that it was inappropriate. I mean, it's got to be a pretty fine line between what you consider to be inappropriate versus impeachable. And it's hard for him to have said that with a straight face, since he didn't even want to bring the witnesses forward to hear from them in a public setting about what potentially could be this inappropriate conduct.
I mean, I would say that given the election results last week in Kentucky, and even more concerningly for the Republicans in Virginia, that some of these Republicans have got to be looking at the prospect of public impeachment hearings, saying that, you know, we don't actually know whether they're going to change public opinion, but if they do have an impact, it's not going to be good for me. So you're going to see Republicans moving away from towing the president's line and more hopefully toward thinking for themselves.
Well, let's tease that out, because we're here 2 days out. It's getting very real. And the question ultimately with what is known, the closer you are to this, the closer you follow the news, the more you read your New York Times updates, your Wall Street Journal updates, the more you've seen, gosh, it got pretty bad. And then people walked back in the White House what they admitted to. That's how bad it was. If you're paying less attention, and as we always note, a lot of people, a lot of voters are busy with their lives, with a job or two jobs. And so if it's going to go public on Wednesday, do you think that the Republicans here are saying, well, more people finding out about what are the public facts is going to help or hurt Trump's case?
Oh, I think it's going to hurt Trump's case. And I think that the Republicans understand that and are starting to hedge their bets. The question is whether these impeachment hearings, when they are done in full view of the public, is that going to break through all the other noise? And are Americans going to stop and watch their TVs the way they did with the Kavanaugh hearings, for example, and just say to themselves, wait a second, something isn't right here. I mean, ultimately, this is a case in which the president of the United States apparently was not working on behalf of the American people, but was, in fact, selling out our government and weaponizing it against his political enemies while at the same time inviting foreign governments to interfere in our election. That's a pretty clear case. And when it's coming out of the mouths of people like Vindman, it's going to be extremely difficult for the Republicans to hide behind just process.
Well, and that goes to why, Barrett, as we're going to get to later in the show, there are Trump aides who are basically sending people to court right now looking for guidance about what to do. Because at the end of the day, people understand if they're in government, this isn't just about patriotism and speaking out. Some people have really put their neck on the line. But now that it's out, if you are too close to some of this stuff, you're not the president. You can be indicted in office. We've had in this country a vice president face that. We've had other aides face it. There's no immunity that goes anywhere near anyone but the president. That part is debated. And I put that to you with new comments from Congressman Jackie Speier, picking up on something we've been reporting for a while, which is that constitutionally, there's a strong case here of bribery, which is impeachable. Take a look.
The president broke the law. He went on a telephone call with the president of Ukraine and said, I have a favor, though, and then proceeded to ask for an investigation of his rival. And this is a very strong case of bribery.
I think the Democrats are smart to be moving away from the language of quid pro quo, aside from the fact that nobody really understands the full meaning of this Latin phrase. But bribery is something that people do understand. People understand what it means to say, give me dirt or I'm not going to give you aid. People get that. And I think as the Democrats are facing the next challenge.
Well, and let me press you on that. Not only that's a clarity reason, and prosecutors and lawyers care a lot about that when you're talking to a jury. And the American public's the ultimate jury. Just people, not picked for any other reason than being citizens, right, and being in good standing, I suppose. But it's deeper than communication. There are only two specific offenses, as we've reported on this show repeatedly, in the Constitution that are explicitly impeachable. Other stuff may be, but you have to debate what a high crime is. Bribery is in there.
Absolutely. And so you're 100% right. They're smart for the narrative part of this, which is, one of the big goals they have for this coming hearings is to paint the narrative for the people. But when you get down to the nitty gritty, what do you actually have to show to cross the line from being improper to being impeachable? And if they can make a strong case that this was bribery, they have crossed that line over into impeachable.
I want to get to some of the reporting you've done on Giuliani. But before we get there, Shelby, I also want to look at the strongest defense on the Trump side. It hasn't come from Donald Trump and it hasn't come from the White House. But I do want to show you one of the best communicators I think that the current Republican Party has, which is Nikki Haley. And she kind of backs away from the whole thing and sort of makes it kind of, if you're not listening that closely, it might sound like, well, wait a minute, is that big? Take a look.
Do you think ultimately the president will be impeached and removed from office?
No. On what? You're going to impeach a president for asking for a favor that didn't happen and giving money and it wasn't withheld? I don't know what you would impeach him on.
We're hearing that, like you said, we're maybe not hearing that from Trump himself, but we are starting to hear that from more and more Republicans. The aid was released. Look at the transcript. There's no quid pro quo. I think there are some key themes that Democrats have to be quite focused on in the hearings, or else this isn't going to go well for them, because you have not just Rudy Giuliani's role, but you have the questions about the quid pro quo. There is also a quid pro quo regarding a White House meeting. The Wall Street Journal reported that Lev Parnas, Giuliani's associate, delivered this quid pro quo message in February to Petro Poroshenko, then Ukrainian president. If you want to come to the White House, you have to announce these investigations. Then it happened with Zelensky, allegedly. So you have a lot going on. You have Rudy Giuliani's role. You also have Ambassador Yovanovitch, and that's a key point. Why was she removed? Who was behind that campaign? There's a lot to focus on, and a lot of these witnesses have shared a lot of interesting information about those three key themes. But will Democrats ultimately focus on this one idea of bribery? Can the message get away from them? Some of these witnesses, Republicans have time to question them as well, and they want to go down different roads. So it'll be interesting to see if Democrats can actually stay focused on this one key point, and at the end of the day, will Americans be tuning in to hear it?
Well, and Barrett, Nick, this is where it's legal-ish, but it's not purely legal.
Right.
And it's a Senate trial, not a criminal trial. And what Nikki Haley is appealing to is people who watch Law and Order and think, well, yeah, attempted bribery or attempted embezzlement or attempted extortion sounds bad, but attempted is not as bad as pulling it off. Is there a reasonable way for them to lean into that? Although I would note, as I have to as a journalist, that the facts of the case suggest it may have been more than attempted. But that's what they're trying to do.
Right. I mean, you nailed it. There is literally no legal distinction here. So if this was a court of law, I mean, there is a charge of not only attempt, but conspiracy to commit a crime. And conspiracy to commit something is punished just as severely as the actual crime itself. So legally, this is a distinction without any meaning here.
And attempted murder, bad.
Right. Yes.
Right. You don't get very far in a real courtroom being like, look, my client only tried to do this and couldn't pull it off, depending on what the offense is. And again, I go back to then you bring in the Constitution and you say the Constitution says, look, the bribery thing is exactly what we're concerned about. Right. Because if officials who have such unitary and executive power, and we know the president does, particularly on foreign policy, if you can auction off things, if you can auction off a bombing here, a pardon there, I mean, the pardon power is almost never reviewable, to use the legal jargon, right? You could pardon almost anyone for any reason, but you can't sell a pardon.
Exactly. That's why the founders were so explicit in putting bribery in there as one of the ways in which you could remove a president, because it is so fundamental to what we think is, how a government should run, that these are things, exactly like you said, that shouldn't be for sale.
Before we go, Giuliani, do you have anything on that?
Oh, I'll let Shelby handle that. She's
I just think it's interesting when you look at this May meeting where the president is telling Sondland and Volker and Perry, talk to Rudy, all the way through the summer when Giuliani is obviously publicly campaigning for these investigations. But the president's very explicit. You'll have to talk to Giuliani. In that phone call with Zelensky, I'll have Giuliani give you a call.
And this is where
His
it
role will be
overlaps
central.
with what we did learn from the Mueller report, which is Bob Mueller documented the level of intent by this president. How when he has bad things he wants to do, whether he pulls them off or not, suddenly the room gets cleared. It's a one-on-one. When he has bad things that he doesn't even trust to pressure Comey with, suddenly Lewandowski gets pulled into it, right? This is classic criminal intent, which doesn't mean that they've proven the whole case. We have to report on it, but that's the intent part. So I know you're fired up about this. I'm now going to tee you up, and you've been reporting on this for a while. On the Parnas front, this is Giuliani's associate, says this meeting about a demand for this Biden inquiry, if corroborated, quote, would reveal the earliest known instance of American aid being tied to demands for Ukraine to take actions that could benefit Trump's reelection. Explain.
Well, that's significant if corroborated, because right now the other people in the meeting are denying this. But if it is true, it's significant because the president, Nikki Haley, the president's allies have said the aid was ultimately released and the Ukrainians didn't even know the hold on aid existed until after the phone call. But if this message was delivered in May, that is months before the phone call happened. And it has this implicit threat, allegedly, according to the reporting. This is Parnas' story. You have to be clear about that. But it's a message that you won't get your aid if you don't open these investigations. And it wasn't so much about investigating. It was about announcing it publicly on TV or in a publication, just the announcement of an investigation. And that is something that would benefit Trump.
Well, Mara, it's almost as if Donald Trump, who may be new to politics, he claims, learned something in 2016, which is that just talking and announcing investigational material is enough to damage someone, even if they're ultimately not charged.
That's right. Let's just remember here that we don't actually need to prove that a crime took place to impeach a president. It is actually not a criminal proceeding, as you pointed out, Ari. And there may have been crimes here, but that's actually beside the point in terms of abuse of power. And the real question is, who's going to have the more powerful story? Someone like Nikki Haley is telling a very compelling story for those who don't want to pay attention. Are we going to be looking at facts, though, or propaganda? Because what she's talking about is ultimately propaganda. It's not based around an actual factual sequence of events. So there's an opportunity here, not just for the Democrats, but for those who believe that something, that there was an abuse of power, to make their case before the American people this week and to cut through the noise and tell a story. And this is about storytelling. It's as much a political process as a legal one.
Well, I think you lay that out really well. And it's also a reminder of how interesting these times are. They may be heavy, but they're interesting because what you just put it is the gap between Nikki Haley minimizing, maybe nothing happened, which is often the first defense you hear in any situation, except Donald Trump's number one top aide, you or me.
I don't know.
Could be anyone.
Siri.
Siri.
She wants to weigh in.
I'd be curious what Siri has to say. The algorithms have all kinds of ways of evaluating evidence, but you have the Nikki Haley defense is, hey, maybe nothing happened. And that might have appealed to a lot of people, except Mick Mulvaney came out and said, oh, something happened, something we do all the time. We do this, get over it, until he had to retract. Great insights from every panelist. Thanks to each of you.
Thank you.
Really
Have an
appreciate it.
interesting week.
Mara, Barrett, Shelby, we'll be seeing all of you again. Hey, I'm Ari Melber from MSNBC. You can see more of our videos right here, or better yet, subscribe to our YouTube channel below. You could have been anywhere in the world, but you're here with us, and we appreciate that.